He declared his firearm in January, did everything right, filled out the paperwork, waited for his appointment, prepared to hand over a rifle he had owned for almost a decade. And as of right now, he still does not know exactly when he will be compensated because the entire program he is part of is sitting on top of a legal question the Supreme Court of Canada has not yet answered. If you own a firearm currently classified as prohibited under the federal ban, here is exactly where things actually stand right now. Not what you have seen repeated online, not what you have assumed based on outdated information, but what is actually happening with this program today. In May 2020, the federal government prohibited the use, sale, and importation of roughly 1,500 firearm models and variants, a list that has since grown to more than 2,500 firearms and their variants. The government created the assault-style firearms compensation program to compensate owners and businesses for firearms that became illegal to possess under that ban. This program has moved through several distinct phases, and where you stand right now depends entirely on which phase applies to you. For businesses, the first phase ran between November 2024 and April 2025, during which over 12,000 firearms were collected and destroyed, with compensation issued to participating businesses. The second phase for businesses has already closed, finishing on June 4th, 2026, with more than 61,900 additional assault-style firearms claimed through that stage. For individual firearm owners, the declaration window ran from January 19th to March 31st, 2026, during which over 68,000 firearms were declared. Combined across both the business and individual streams, more than 142,000 assault-style firearms have now been declared, collected, or destroyed under this program. If you already declared your firearm during that individual window, you are currently somewhere in the collection and validation process. That process is described as well underway across various regions of the country and is expected to continue through early fall 2026. Compensation is issued after your firearm has been successfully validated, which means there is a real gap between declaring your firearm and actually receiving payment. And that gap is currently affecting tens of thousands of Canadians at the same time. Here is something specific that most people miss entirely. If your collection appointment will require significant travel distance, or if your specific situation makes an in-person appointment genuinely difficult, there is a shipping option available for sending your firearm in for disposal as part of this program. This is not automatic. A program representative has to confirm you are eligible for this option directly with you when you are booking your collection appointment. If you are in a remote area or facing a serious access barrier, ask about this directly rather than assuming an in-person appointment is your only option. Now here's the part of this story that almost nobody is connecting properly, and it is the single most important piece of context for understanding where this entire program currently stands. This ban has been under legal challenge since shortly after it was introduced. Firearm owners, businesses, hunters, sport shooters, and the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights argue that the federal cabinet exceeded its lawful authority by prohibiting these firearms through an order in council rather than through parliament, and separately raised charter-based arguments about how the regulations were structured. The federal court dismissed that challenge in 2023. The Federal Court of Appeal upheld that dismissal in April 2025. And then in March 2026, the Supreme Court of Canada agreed to hear the case, consolidating 4 separate appeals into a single proceeding. That detail changes everything about the buyback program's current status. The government has not paused the compensation program while this plays out. Collection, validation, and compensation are continuing as planned. But because the underlying legality of the ban itself is now in front of the Supreme Court, the government has extended the amnesty period that protects current owners from criminal liability while they wait through this process. That amnesty was previously set to expire on October 30th, 2026. It has now been extended again, and the new expiry date is set for 90 days after the Supreme Court actually issues its ruling, which is expected sometime next year. What this means practically is straightforward, even though almost nobody is explaining it this clearly. You are not required to rush into a decision out of fear that your legal protection disappears imminently. Your amnesty currently extends well past the original deadline, specifically because the government itself is waiting on the same Supreme Court decision everyone else is. At the same time, this does not mean the program has been suspended or that nothing is happening. Collection and compensation are continuing in parallel with the court case, completely independent of what the Supreme Court eventually decides. So here's what you actually need to know if you currently own a firearm affected by this ban. First, confirm exactly which phase of the program applies to your specific firearm and whether your declaration window has already opened, closed, or is still upcoming, because the timeline differs depending on whether you are an individual owner or a business. Second, if you have already declared your firearm, understand that validation and compensation take time, and the current target for completing this phase of the program is sometime around October 2026. Though that is a target, not a guarantee. Third, know that your amnesty protection currently runs until 90 days after the Supreme Court rules on this case, not on the earlier October deadline that has now been superseded. Fourth, if accessing an in-person collection appointment is a genuine hardship for you, ask directly about the shipping option when you book. And underneath all of this sits one larger reality that affects every single decision you make about your firearms right now. The legal foundation of this entire ban is currently being argued in front of the highest court in the country, and that decision has not been made yet. Whatever you decide to do with the firearm affected by this program, you are making that decision while the actual legal question is still genuinely open. Stay informed about both tracks at once: the practical mechanics of declaring and collecting compensation, and the legal case that could ultimately determine whether any of this was lawful to begin with. This video is for general, educational, and informational purposes only and is not legal advice. Program details, deadlines, and eligibility can change. Always confirm your specific situation directly with the assault-style firearms compensation program or a licensed firearms lawyer before making decisions.